So welcome to another edition of the Sunday Recap Podcast. I'm Jason Smith here with
David Wojnicki.
Yes, you know what? We sit here 1 week away from Christmas Day.
It's true.
Week.
It is. Yes, and you're sporting your very Christmas. I love this. I love this. You and Angie wore it to the staff Christmas party. It's a great Christmas sweater.
She sent me a picture of it and said, "Can we please buy these and wear them?" I said, "Yes, dear. For you, I will." So yeah.
1 week away from Christmas.
That's great. I'm excited. For me, December's gone by super fast.
I would agree. There's been a lot going on. And I told you this morning as we came in, I said, my brain's a little pooped out with Jesus and Christmas because we've been going through his life all this fall. And so it's kind of been this extended season of some that we only look at for a few weeks, typically once a year. So it's been a nice thing to really fill out that full picture. And thank you for everybody who's been very kind in the comments. They've been very appreciative of doing that because we rush through it and we haven't often paused and taken time to go through those things. So I've appreciated the gratitude of the congregation in that regard.
Well, speaking of Jesus.
Yes. Well, go ahead, Jason.
Well,
speaking of,
it's my segue into yesterday's sermon.
okay, there you go. Okay.
We looked at what is called the wise men.
Yeah.
You talked about them as Magi.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at a few things through yesterday's sermon. So before we dive in all those things, again, this is where we get to sit and chat about things that you couldn't cover.
Right.
I know there's more things that you wanted to cover. So as you prepared for yesterday's sermon, something that stood out or something that you wish, I wish I could expanded more on this?
Oh, I mean, there were a lot of things. I'll say this is kind of my opening remarks. The fact that, I made a big deal in the beginning of the message that there is a lot that's not said about the Magi, that God's word is just silent. And just for us, I feel my responsibility when I preach the word, I know you feel that as well, and the other guys on staff is, and I've said this throughout the series, we don't want to veer into speculation. We don't want to build a sermon off of speculation. There's some really neat things. We'll talk about those, I believe, this morning, but our aim is to really hit the truths that God's word says and that are clear and that are right there. And because I want you to be able to read your Bibles and be able to say, oh, I could get that on my own if I slowed down and if I read it or if I looked at other passages and cross-referenced those things in its context, rather than some messages I hear, really creative messages and some great thoughts, but they're not drawn directly from the text. Right. And so, I mean, I enjoy, hearing some of those, but I'm just but that's not, I think, faithful to what the text is about. So if I were to say one thing kind of to start, it's we didn't want to veer into speculation, but I know that frustrated maybe a little bit with the question. So maybe today we'll answer some of those things.
Yeah, you said the wise men.
Yeah.
So can you expand on that anyway?
Yeah, so something that I think is really important for us is let me just say it again, we don't know a lot about them.
Yes.
But wise men is our translation of the Greek word Magi. Yep. And the Greek word Magi is one of those words that had a lot of different meanings. I'm gonna point you to one thing. In Acts chapter 13, this word is actually used again of a Jewish guy who, as he was performing false miracles and it's translated sorcerer in Acts 13. I'm gonna go to my cheat sheet here because I was in my notes earlier. And so when you come to Acts 13, the guy's name, who do we got there? Oh yeah, Elymas is the guy that's mentioned here. And so he's performing these quasi miracles, and he's a false prophet, and he's called a sorcerer. So at minimum, even in the Bible. There's not a consistent translation of what it is. And so in that culture, in that context, D.A. Carson, who is a scholar, said, they were men, the best way we can understand Magi, the way that word was used back then, it could refer to people who were intrigued by astrology, by magic, by the ability to look into the future, and who had the resources to do so. But they were also viewed as, in some contexts, charlatans, because they would try and play off future predictions and say that the stars meant certain things. So anyway, we don't know a ton about them. Sometimes it was a derogatory term. Sometimes it was a neutral term. Sometimes it was a term that was used to refer to people of some kind of standing. So that's why it's wide open. Who were they?
And what you said yesterday about the song, it quite change the meaning if it wasn't we three.
we three sorcerers of Orient are, right? or even we three charlatans, you know? I mean, like, we don't know how the first people who read this,
right?
We don't know what they thought of. We've kind of elevated them over time.
Yes.
Because that just fits the story better. And then we speculate a lot on their location. Let me just kind of hit on one of the biggest things that people think is that the wise men came from Babylon. And they're like, why Babylon? Well, it's east of Israel. But also, are wise men mentioned anywhere else in the Bible? Daniel. Daniel goes, right, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's their, Babylonian names. They all are taken from Israel as part of the exile, and they go to Babylon. They're trained up in Nebuchadnezzar's court in order to be the wise men. Now, that's not the word Magi, isn't the word that's used, but they were the wise men of Israel, or the wise men of Babylon, the sages and things like that. And so it wasn't just the four of them that served in that capacity. It says there were many of these men who served as the advisors and the wise men in Babylon. And so Daniel makes some incredible prophecies about the coming of this anointed one, this savior, this man like the son of man who's going to come down and reign and rule over all the nations. And so people speculate, well, maybe because the men in Babylon had access to some of Daniel's prophecies, maybe that's why they were connecting the star to, to what was happening in Judea. But we don't know. I even said, though, if you lived in Israel at that time and you said somebody was from the east, it meant that they were from across the Jordan.
Yes.
So it could also have been people that were really close by. The sense from the story is that these guys went a long distance. They made a big deal of it.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the star.
Yes.
Tell me about that. How does the star work in this story?
Astrology was huge in the ancient world. It still has kind of gotten back today. People like, what's your signs in the star and stuff. And so one of the cool things we know, and I think the star was a supernatural occurrence. It wasn't something found in nature naturally. But the alignment of Saturn and Jupiter happened astrologically in that time period, like right around that 4 BC area. And so a lot of people have said, maybe that's what they saw. Stars also represented kingship back then. There was this crazy thing that happened in, I think it was 40 BC. I can't remember when Julius Caesar died, either in 40 or 44 BC. Look it up, but it's either one of those two. When he died, by a random circumstance, there was a astrological phenomenon that happened, and above his funeral pyre, there was this star that came into focus and into orbit that wasn't normally there. It happens, and so people looked at that, and they're like, he was divine, because this star appears over him. So that's 40 years before Jesus is born. And so people were, attributing, stars even back then to the affirmation of people as deity or whatever. So stars meant significant things. So when the guys saw it, the wise men saw it, I think that it was already in their psyche, if you will, to recognize that was a big deal. I told you something, though. There's this crazy thing that was happening in and around the 1st century and we have historical record from like Josephus, I always mispronounce this, but Tacitus or Tatian. There were a number of historians that all were saying that back in that day, there were people that were believing that a Judean king, a king over all kings, would rise out of Judea. And not because of the biblical account. For some other reason, there was gossip going around. And Vespasian was somebody who eventually became emperor of Rome. But in AD 60, he conquers Jerusalem. He goes back to Rome to kind of do his campaign in order to be the emperor. And he eventually does become emperor. And one of the things that he says is, look, I conquered Judea. I'm the king who's come out of Judea. And that's AD 60. So I don't know. See, this is how does that help me? How does that information help us preach that text yesterday? It doesn't. It's fascinating stuff. That's what we're talking about it now. It helps make maybe a little more sense, but it doesn't push the story forward. So but that's some of the stuff on the star.
Okay, and so now I'm going to take you. So we talk about the wise men looking at the star. What about the gifts? You talked briefly about those yesterday.
I know.
And so,
kind of rushed it a little bit at the end, but got to the main point of it. The thing that stands out to me from Matthew's account with the gifts, and we're talking about the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, okay, is that when they go, it says here in the text in verse 11, and going into the house, they saw the child with his mother, or with Mary's mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So rather than just saying that they offered him treasures, they say, well, this was what to them were their treasures. Their treasures. So the point is not what does the gold, frankincense, and myrrh represent. It's about that the gold, frankincense, and myrrh represent the type of things that were treasures to the wise men, which in the ancient world had tremendous value. Gold had tremendous value, frankincense had tremendous value, myrrh had tremendous value, and those things weren't, well, outside of gold, weren't found readily available in Israel at the time. Okay. So if you had them, you had something of value. And so the real point is that they gave of their treasures. But we can say that there was a potential, notice what I'm saying here, theological purpose behind the gifts. And there was definitely a practical purpose. Practical. So let's talk about the theological first, and I'll get to the practical. The theological could be said is that gold was a gift that was always offered to kings. If you came to honor a king, you brought gold. It was the recognized rare precious metal. It was the gift of kings. Frankincense definitely was clearly used in the ancient world in the worship of gods as part of offerings of sacrifices, things like that. Across the board, didn't matter who you were, you offered up frankincense in the false religions of the time. And so there was this recognition that it was the incense for deities. So obviously, Jesus the king, Jesus, frankincense. Myrrh is one of those ones that's like a little bit like nobody quite knows what to do with myrrh. Okay. We do know that it was used as an embalming agent for the preservation of bodies, but it was also used in medicinal purposes as well as a kind of like a numbing agent. It could be used to deaden pain and things like that. So that's where that's where we get this speculation. We got gold, we got frankincense, and it comes up later, and so we could say theologically those gifts do point to the role of Jesus. But hey, church, can we say that with 100% that that's why it's referenced that way? No, because the Bible doesn't say it. What it does say is it was treasures to them. Yes. Now, here to me is, I think, the thing that is much more clear. Okay. We didn't get to talk about this because, again, we just didn't have time, and it's a whole other part of the story. In the timeline of Jesus' early life, it was out talking with my girls about it last night. How do we think about it? Let's just walk through the timeline really quick. I'm just going to do from his birth. Mary and Joseph arrive in Bethlehem. When they arrive in Bethlehem, she gives birth to Jesus. 8 days later, they circumcise Jesus. 32 days later, they're still in Bethlehem. They've not gone back to Nazareth. It's too long of a journey, at least 4 days, maybe 5, maybe even more. So they're staying in Bethlehem. 40 days after his birth, they're living in Bethlehem. They travel up to Jerusalem, 4 or 5 miles, depending upon how you want to count it. 8 kilometers, that much I can say. Okay. They get to Jerusalem. They offer up sacrifices. They return to Bethlehem. Now, I'm going to be at like 99.9% sure that the wise men did not arrive on the night of his birth, nor did they arrive before he offered up a sacrifice in Bethlehem. Which is why in the text he's referred to as a child and not a baby, because at least 40 days have passed, and you could still call him a baby, whatever. But the other reason why I know that they didn't arrive before that is because when they went to the temple, we talked about this, they offered the gifts of the doves, right? Yes. Which were the poor man's gifts. Well, if you've just been given gold, frankincense, and myrrh by wise men, we don't know how much, but there would have been some value. I think they would have bought a sacrifice of greater value at that point. But instead, I think God, by his kind providence, has the wise men arrive afterwards. So they didn't spend their money on that sacrifice, because after they give the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, what do we know what happens in the text? Herod is bent on killing the babies. Yep. He doesn't want to worship the child. He wants to destroy him. And so verse 12, I only reference this briefly. It says, and being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. And then the text goes on to say that then the Lord came to Joseph, and an angel appeared to him in a dream and said, hey, listen, Herod wants you and the baby dead. Flee to Egypt. Well, now the fleeing to Egypt as a carpenter is a little bit easier when you have gold, frankincense, and myrrh to trade. And so a very practical reason for the gifts, I believe, was in God's preservation of the family and taking care of them, because then they go down to Egypt for at least 2 years or so. Okay. And then they come back. And so I think there's a practical reason for the gifts. Yep. 110% that God's like, not only is it showing what our worship of Jesus should look like, giving of ourselves, but also for Mary and Joseph, taking care of them when they went down to Egypt.
Wonderful.
So those are all those extra things.
Those extra things. Anything else on that? You've said a lot, and I'm not saying you should have more.
No. No, I think that was the big thing is the only part of the story that, and again, it was going to be a total downer, so that's why I stopped where I stopped, was you should read on in the story, and you should see that the rejection of Jesus as king, and this could be the whole other message, right, is found in how Herod responds from the beginning of his life. It's so vehement was Herod to not submit to God's ordained plan for the salvation of humanity and for himself, that he looked to destroy every male child under the age of 2, which, I mean, is just an atrocity. I mean, it's just, some people have asked, well, how many were there? Bethlehem isn't huge, by the way. So I'm saying that it's still horrible, but it was probably maybe 50 boys. We're not thinking thousands here, right? It's just that there just weren't the numbers under the age of 2, speculation at that point, 50 to maybe 200, but we're not in the thousands. Regardless, horrible destruction of life.
Right.
But Jason, as you think about that and what he does there, we just see man, in Luke's gospel, Simeon had predicted that Jesus would be for the rise and fall of many in Israel. And already his coming was divisive, so much so that Herod wanted to kill these children. I mean, it's crazy. Also lets me believe that Jesus, when he ascertains from the wise men, when did the star appear? It doesn't say specifically. People assume that maybe they had seen it 2 years before. Okay. I'm now just going to speculate. I think that probably, I'm going to give the number and say maybe that they told Herod, the star appeared to us a year ago, or maybe even 6 months ago, and so it took us 6 months to get here. And so I think Herod picks that 2-year time frame. I don't think if they had said 2 years, then he would have given himself a wider berth, 4 years. So I think. Again, they give him that, maybe we saw it 6 months ago, we saw it a year ago. And so he covers his distance, like a year on either end, just to be sure. Horrible, but nonetheless.
Horrible. It is horrible.
Yeah, how's that for
Right, I mean, how do you...
That's how we didn't end the message on that note, because that wasn't what, So.
But of course, Christ was spared, obviously, and great for us, and because salvation came to us. Well, this is the last podcast of this year. Next week we're off.
Goodness, we're off next week.
Then we should be back the first week of January, hopefully with a new name. Some people have already given us some suggestions.
So please, if you have some suggestions, we are going to change the name. We know it because, like we saw, it's not just a recap. We're going deeper. We're looking at things. Sometimes not even addressing things that were even brought up in the message on Sunday. So
if you have a suggestion, it's questions@vccc.org. Questions@vccc.org. Since Christmas is 1 week away, I'm just going to ask you your favorite Christmas carol.
Oh, man.
When I say Christmas carol, I don't mean Jingle Bells. No. Really about Christ.
No, really about Christ. I got to go, Oh, Holy Night. I just, fall on your knees. It hits me every single time. So what about you? What do you?
You and I laugh because you're a lot like my wife. I'm a lot like your wife. Holy Night is definitely my top favorite one.
Yeah.
And Hark the Herald right there with it. God and sinners reconciled.
You and I have mentioned this in the past, and I would encourage people this Sunday just to listen as they sing. Look at the words.
Yes.
There is some rich, deep theology in these Christmas carols, these Christmas hymns, really. Even the joy to the world, the Lord has come, let earth receive
Her King.
There's this call. In fact, I think it's Monday. I was working on my message a little bit. I think I'm actually going to reference "O Holy Night" and just. Yeah. We'll see if if you listen to the podcast, we'll see if I come back to if it works it into the sermon for the Sunday. Which, by the way, so we're going to be Christmas Eve on Sunday. We're going to have our 2 services on Sunday morning.
Yes.
And we're going to have all the elements of it. We're going to have the Advent reading. We're going to still have communion. We're going to have the candle lighting. We're going to have the songs, scripture reading.
And it's a family service.
It is a family service. Yeah. So all the kids, everybody's going to be together. We'll have the nursery open and available. We'll have the family room open and available. But we'll want people to be in here. It'll be a little bit of an abbreviated message, but it'll be a full service. Yes, lots of singing, lots of we'll do the candlelight. It's going to be a special Sunday. Yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. Well, thanks for being with us, and God bless you. See you Sunday at Christmas Eve, and then we'll be back on the podcast in a couple of weeks.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.